Hi everyone, it's Robin with Beautician and Florist in Vancouver, Canada. I have a tutorial for you today on how to make a high-end, loose, sort of garden-inspired bridal bouquet. So to make it easy, because we're going to use a lot of different flowers and greens today, I've split it up. We're going to go flowers first and then we'll cover the greens used. So in terms of flowers, we have a wide variety. And that's sort of my number one tip. If you're looking to make a garden-looking bouquet, like something you just picked from a garden, one of the ways to really achieve that look is to use many different types of flowers with many different types of texture, which is what we've got going on here. The counterpoint to that, whether you're making it yourself or you're getting a florist to make it, is those kinds of bouquets tend to cost more because they have more types of flowers in there, more types of filler that drive up the cost but don't necessarily make the bouquet bigger. So that's something to keep in mind if you're trying to do this on a budget. You're going to try to balance both of those goals to get that look without spending more than your budget. So in terms of the flowers that we're going to use today, I chose a variety of different types because I'm looking for that different kind of texture look. So to start with, we've got two different types of roses. We have regular standard roses, and you can absolutely use standard roses in a loose bouquet. You don't have to use garden roses. This is a variety called Quicksand. It's a really good choice if you love blush tones or antique vintage shades. A close sub would be Sahara or Faith. Just note that they do tend to be considered higher end premium standard roses, so you might pay a premium on those ones. But you don't have to. You can choose any type of a standard rose, preferably one that opens bigger. They do tend to look bigger in a bouquet like this. Because I wanted to make something that's a bit different than we normally make, I do have garden roses as well, which if you have been looking on Pinterest, you've probably fallen in love with. They're basically just, they're a much more expensive version of a regular rose, and I'll hold up one to compare the size difference. They're not necessarily bigger. That's a good thing to note. Not all garden roses are bigger than standard roses, but they do have a lot more petals inside, which is the look that a lot of brides love, is that sort of ruffled, pretty look. So we've got the standard roses and garden roses. And just to note, I'm not going to go over the prep for these. We've gone over that in our rose hand-tied bridal bouquet. So if you're not sure how to prep a rose for a bouquet, I'd recommend checking out that video. In general, I've just stripped the leaves and the thorns off the stems. The next type of flower I have is this gorgeous red passion mini calla. Actually, it's not a mini calla. I think it's a standard. And the reason I wanted this is because in my bouquet, I want elements that are going to droop. And the nice thing about callas is you can mold the stems to get them to go a certain way. So that's the only kind of prep I would do with a calla. There's no leaves to remove. You can just massage the stems to get them to sort of to go in the direction that you'd like. They do this beautiful drooping motion here. Another flower that I have is Veronica. So this is a type of white Veronica, which is amazing in a bouquet like this. In terms of the prep, there are leaves to remove. I would probably not remove all of them. I would remove just the lower half or so to about that, because I think that the leaves here are going to be visible in the bouquet and will add a certain element with that as well. For filler, I chose Genestra. So Genestra is very similar to wax from a distance, maybe not that similar, but it has a similar function. And it's basically, it provides a lot of texture. The little petals are falling off. It's pretty delicate. So that's a really good choice for a bouquet if you're looking to add texture as well. I don't think we've used this before. We've got Lisianthus here. So Lisianthus is gorgeous. Gets used a lot in wedding work. The thing to note about it is it's multi-branch. So this is one stem, but it has multiple stems coming off of it. So like a rose, you would take the leaves off, but you don't want to waste the stems. So you would cut them where they join, and now you've got two stems. And you're also going to note that there's this flower that grows lower than this one. So the tricky part about working with Lisianthus is you just always want to be mindful of that. Like sometimes you'll have a rose that's lower, or not a rose, a flower head that's lower than you want it to be. You can always snip it off and save it for boutonnieres later, or it may work in your design. But just something to note with Lisianthus. Unlike roses, it's often multiple stems or multiple heads per stem, and you just have to account for that. So that's the Lisianthus. So the two things that we're going to go over in a bit more detail later on how to work with, we've got Cymbidium orchids as well, and these are gorgeous. Cymbidium orchids are costly. So this single stem is going to retail over 30 bucks, most likely. So as a single stem, it's expensive, but as you'll note, there's lots of flower heads on here. So the way to work with Cymbidium orchids in a bouquet is to do what you would do if you were using them in a boutonniere. You need to cut them off the main stem and wire and tape them so they have an artificial stem, and then you can place them in a bouquet. When you use them that way, they're pretty cost effective. The cost comes down almost to like using a rose, but that's one of the things you have to plan for when you're wanting to use orchids, is finding a way to use them everywhere in your design so you make it cost effective. The last thing I have just for texture, and because I love it so much, is thistle. So this is a type of thistle that I think goes with everything. It's almost like a neutral, and it's extremely useful, or it adds a lot of impact in a bouquet like this. Just the touch of it, that blue picks up the wine and the blush. It just works. It's really cohesive all together. And the thing about thistle, like the Lisianthus and a bit like the Cymbidium, is one stem has a lot of little heads on it. So the way to use thistle, you can use it as an entire stem, but you find it won't go very far, and you won't see all the buds. So often what I'll do is I'll cut, just like I do with other types of flowers like mums and the Lisianthus as well, is you cut off the side branches and you save them for boutonnieres later. You can wire them individually and put them in a bouquet, but that's the way you get something like this to stretch further, and you get your budget to stretch further as well. So that covers the flowers. The only sort of general information I have about this, because garden bouquets are trending super heavily right now, this kind of look is really in, and I'd say the one thing that I think a lot of couples or brides that are planning to do this themselves worry a lot about is getting the exact flowers that they find in a picture that they love. So my only comment about that is not everything's going to be available year round, but just when you're looking for flowers and you're considering substitutions, just consider what function the flower plays. So something like a rose, you're not going to have a hard time finding, but something like that is a single flower that's round, and it has like it almost sort of, it's like the focal point of the bouquet. Then you have things like callas, which add a lot of like movement because they're draping out. Something like a tulip would be a good substitute. For Veronica, you could use Lismachia, snapdragons. Don't get too caught up in the details. Just think about what function is the flower playing in the picture that you like, and try to come up with different sorts of substitutions that could have that same sort of role in the bouquet. So we're done with the flowers. We're going to move on to the greens before we start putting it all together. When it comes to the greens, I like to use at least 3 different types in a bouquet like this. So just like with the flowers, that tends to drive up the price when you're making a bouquet that's kind of garden inspired and loose and textured, because typically I would just use one type of green, usually to color the outside of a bouquet. But in a bouquet like this, the greens are a prominent part of the overall look, and they're sort of blended in with the flowers. So because of that, I like to use different types, and partially for the texture, so you get different sort of feelings to the material, but also because of function. So in a bouquet like we're making today, which has something tall like Veronica in it, and if I didn't use Veronica, I could have used Delphinium or Snaps. I like to have a tall green that complements it, because I'm not a fan of things that just stick out on their own. That's entirely me. You might have a different preference, and that's okay. But when it comes to sort of the aesthetic that I like things that transition and blend well. So something like baby blue euc is awesome for that. It has a little bit of a drapingness, not draping, but it's not perfectly straight, but it does stand upright, which for eucalyptus is not too common. So I like to have a tall green, and then I like to have something that droops. So in other videos, you've seen us talk about seeded eucalyptus. And seeded eucalyptus it's a lot more, it tends to do this, it drapes. So that's a really good one on the outside of the bouquet if you're trying to get bits of the bouquet to sort of fall outwards. So seeded eucalyptus is good. If eucalyptus wasn't available, you could use something like pepperberry. So just like with the flowers, don't worry too much about the exact greens used. You can just focus on the function that they have, and you can find a substitute. The third type of green I use, so I've got something tall, something kind of drapey. I like to use something that's sort of bushy, and that's to give volume with the greens. Baby blue euc is great for standing up, but as you can see, there's not much to one stem. Something like a Eucalyptus parvifolia or gunny or Moon Lagoon, I think it's called. Something like this is a lot more bushy, and we're getting a lot more volume to this. So I kind of covered the 3 general areas of reasons to use greens in a bouquet like this. I have 2 different types of euc, by the way, for that. So just to show you how similar they are. One is parvifolia and one is Moon Lagoon. Very interchangeable. Don't sweat it if you can't get one. There's usually a good substitute for it. So that covers the greens, and really quickly, I'm just gonna go over the supplies that you would use. So the usual, this is very repetitive with our other videos because most bouquet work is repetitive. It's the same sort of steps you take. Strong snips to cut. You want a good strong tape or elastic bands you can use to bind your whole bouquet together. I'm a fan of the strapping tape, as you might have seen in other videos. A ribbon to bind the finished product, and those little 3/4 inch pins that I like to use to get that bouquet ribbon to actually stick onto the stems. You don't normally need this, but because we are going to be wiring and taping the Cymbidium orchids, you do need thin wire. I would use a 26 or 28 gauge, and you need that green floral tape, that one that's not sticky until you stretch it and make it stick to itself. So it's the kind that gets used in boutonniere work mostly, but that's only because of the cymbidiums. We might wire and tape some of the thistle as well. Normally you don't need wire and tape for a hand-tied bouquet. So just a quick note on the greens before we get started. Just like with the flowers, you do want to prep them before you start. So the next shot we're gonna have is all of the prepped flowers and greens. So what that means is, even though they are greens, you want to take the lower part off because you want the finished product to have clean stems at the bottom. So it's fairly easy to do with most greens. The only thing you want to note is baby blue eucalyptus is incredibly sticky. So when you're doing this, what I'm doing here, I recommend wearing some kind of a latex or rubber glove because it will get on your hands. It's very difficult to get off. But other than that, it's pretty easy to do. So just like your flowers, strip off the lower half or third of the stems so that when you're finished your bouquet, they're clean all the way to the bottom. Okay, now it's time to start putting the bouquet together. All right, so we have all of our flowers and greens ready to go, and that is a major tip for any sort of DIY work you're wanting to do, whether it's this style of bouquet or any other type. You want everything ready to go. You don't want to be taking leaves off as you're going. You want everything prepped. So we've got the lower branches of the Genesta are off. We've got our greens ready to go. You can see at least the bottom half, at the very minimum, is stripped of leaves. Everything's ready to work with, including the cymbidiums and the thistle. So I decided to save a bit of time because this is a longer video, and I've already wired the cymbidium orchids. If you want to know how to do this, we do have a video on how to wire cymbidiums, and it's exactly the same technique. The only thing is you're going to leave the wire even longer because you're putting it into a bouquet, but I have all of these ready. So you remember at the beginning we had that long stalk of flowers. We've now made them into individual flowers. And we've done the same thing with thistle. I thought about using the natural branches, but I tend to use it this way just because I like really specific placement and I don't want it to overwhelm the bouquet. I just want little bits. So I've done the same thing. I've cut the heads and I've wired them. So that's all ready to go too. So everything is ready to go, whether you put it on the table or it's in buckets. Prep is the most important thing and probably the most time-consuming part of making a DIY bouquet as well. So to get started, so how do you get started? You pretty much just start putting pieces together. So I would start with a couple of taller things. So remember how I said I like a tall green to go beside my tall flower, like Veronica. I think they look really nice together. So we start with that, maybe put a bit of filler in there, something like this. In other videos, we've talked about I've said that it's not too important whether your stems cross like this or whether they're completely straight. That's the case for like a round hand-tied bouquet. The one exception to that is the bouquet we're making today. So in this kind of a bouquet, I have found that it is a lot better if you get the stems to cross. And the reason for that is you'll get that splayed look. Otherwise, the bouquet tends to be a little bit too tight. So that's, I guess, another sort of tip for you if you've watched our other videos is for something like this, at the point where the stems come together, at the bottom, you want them to splay out. That's what gets you that loose look. So you just start putting stuff in together. It's gonna start coming together as you work, so don't be too nervous if right away it's not quite the look you like. So we're gonna put some more greens in. I'll just turn it around so you can see the garden rose. And you start working in your textures. And you can see already the importance of those textures that you chose because everything is sort of complementing each other. No one thing dominates and it all works together. So let's put some roses in here. That's nice. A little bit of Genesta on the back as well, like here. We'll work the back as well. One thing that might make it easier for you, depending on the finished look that you want, you might find it easier to make a one-sided bouquet. And it's also less cost because you don't need as many flowers. So what you would do is you would focus on the front and the back you would leave with just mostly greens. I'm gonna try to do a full round bouquet today, but that's just something to keep in mind. I think a lot of beginners would find that easier to do. And like I said, it does bring the cost down in terms of making it. So I want these to be at different levels because I want it to look kind of natural. So we're going to do one rose a little higher than the other one. Let's work in some Veronica. Let's put some seeded Euc into there. And this whole time you can see the stems on the bottom are splayed out and I'm pinching it sort of in the middle of the bouquet. This is one of the more time-consuming bouquets to make just because it's a bit more finicky. Like the placement of the flowers is a lot more important. You're working with different types of flowers. When you use just one type, you're not too concerned with how they come together because they kind of just do. But something like this, you're wanting it to have a certain look at the end. Okay, so I've got this started. This, like I said, it takes a while to make this bouquet. So I'm gonna take a break here using the same method you see here. Just adding in greens, adding in flowers, getting that overall shape. I'm gonna do a bit more work on this and we're gonna get back together where I have a bigger bouquet to show you and we're gonna take it from there. So using the same methods that I just showed you to get started on the bouquet, I finished the bouquet. So it's come together just fabulously. It looks amazing. There's great blending of the textures. It even has a sort of prairie feel from the Genestra. In terms of finishing it, the main thing is to note, just like with any other bouquet that we make that has a rounded shape, even though this is kind of a wild look and it's a bit loose, it does still have a rounded shape to it. And the way to get that is, as you start adding flowers to the outside of the bouquet, you are going to add them lower and lower. So almost like in steps, and that's how you get that rounded element to the overall finished bouquet. Nothing else really to note that was special. I worked in seeded eucalyptus on the outside, like I said, and it's got this wonderful sort of draping look that completes the effect. Yeah, it looks fantastic. A lot of blending. That's the biggest thing that I think if you're trying to do a look like this at home and you're kind of new to flower arranging, that's the biggest thing to focus on. So just blend, blend, blend. If there's anything poking out of your bouquet, I recommend having something else poke out with it, if that makes sense. So basically, like wherever the Veronica is, I have some baby blue Euc coming out with it. I have some Genestra kind of cushioning it. Nothing just sticks out naked by itself. There's always something with it that transitions all of the textures together. So we've put everything in there. I'm going to bind it before we put it in water. I didn't mention that when we went over the supplies, but I've got a vase of water ready for the finished bouquet, which is what you want because you want everything ready to go when you need it. So in terms of binding it, I use strapping tape. You can use an elastic. You can use any sort of strong tape that's going to do the job, and you're going to bind it just at the point where you were holding it, as tightly as possible because you want this thing to stay in place. In terms of the time, it took me about 20 to 25 minutes to finish the bouquet. So this is a time-consuming one to make as well. It's DIY friendly, but it's not necessarily for a beginner. You do want to take your time with this one. So it's a look that's very in, and you can do it, but you really want to give yourself the time and pay attention to how everything is coming together and blending. So we've bound it together. As you can see, the stems are splayed at the bottom. They're not parallel. And we're going to just cut it shorter before we put it into water. I'm going to skip the step where I add the ribbon. I've done that in other videos. You can take a look to get the details on that. Something like on a bouquet like this, something that would look awesome would be like tails of a long ribbon. You wouldn't necessarily want to bind it all the way down. I would probably just do like 2 inches right here where the stems come together and cross the most, just so you keep the stems sort of crossing out at the bottom. So in terms of cutting it shorter, I think I'll cut it to about here. This is going to go everywhere. It's going to make a mess. I normally cut into a bucket, but this is what I have. So another reason this isn't 100% DIY friendly, or not really maybe friendly if you're not a professional, is there's something to note. Because we used wired orchids in this bouquet, the thing to note, and we've covered this in other videos where we talk about wiring flowers, because, oh, I should put this into water right away. I got distracted talking. So we get that into water, get the stems wet. So because we've used orchids that are wired, they don't have a water source. So because of that, I do 2 things. One, I give it a spray with, I've talked about this in the hydrangea video, Crowning Glory. And what Crowning Glory does is it's a fine mist it gives it sort of a waxy coating. It's not visible when it's dry. And once it is dry, I'll put it in my cooler right away. So this is going to help those orchids and the thistle, which don't have a water source, stay extra fresh when this is, because it's out of water. So the other thing I do is once it's dry, I put it in my cooler. So that's the most important thing you're gonna have to keep in mind. If you wire any flowers, even if it's just a touch, even if the rest of them are natural stems, if you wire any flowers into a bouquet, they have to go into a refrigerated unit overnight. This can be your regular fridge, that's fine. Just watch the temperature, make sure it doesn't go below freezing. But they have to be kept cold because otherwise the petals will get soft, it'll look droopy, anything that's been wired. So for that wetting level of quality, you need to refrigerate this bouquet. The way to get around that is to not use orchids or not wire any flowers into it. So do a completely hand-tied option. That's what you can do if you don't have the ability to keep it cold. I think I've covered it all. I don't think there was anything else. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any other further ideas for videos, let me know. Otherwise, we will see you next time.